My name's Alex, and this happened 2 summers ago in Oregon. I'd planned a solo camping trip near the Deschutes River. I wanted peace and quiet, just me, a fishing rod, and my tent. For the first 2 days, everything was perfect. The weather was warm, the water was calm, and I barely saw another soul. On the third night, just after midnight, I was sitting by the fire when I heard it. A scream. A woman's scream, sharp and distant, carrying across the river. I froze. My first thought was maybe someone had fallen in, or maybe it was just coyotes. But then I saw her. Across the river, under the trees, a figure stood, a girl, maybe in her 20s. She was dripping wet, clothes clinging to her like she'd just come out of the water. She didn't move. She just stood there, staring at me. I shouted, "Hey, are you okay?" But she didn't answer. She turned suddenly and bolted into the woods. I couldn't shake it. I sat there for an hour, staring at the opposite bank. That's when the whispers started. Soft at first, then louder, circling my tent. I told myself it was the wind, but the whispers didn't sound like wind. Around 2 in the morning, I heard splashing, slow, deliberate steps in the river. I unzipped my tent, shining my flashlight. And that's when I saw her standing on my side of the river now, only 20 feet away. She was motionless, head tilted, smiling directly at my tent. I slammed the zipper shut and sat in the corner, clutching my bear spray. I couldn't move. I couldn't think. At some point, I must have blacked out, because when I opened my eyes, it was daylight. But my cooler was tipped over, food ripped apart, clothes scattered everywhere. Everything looked like it had been tossed and stomped. I grabbed my phone and drove straight to a gas station. Later, I came back with a ranger and 2 cops to collect the rest of my stuff. They searched the area but found no tracks, no signs of anyone. The cop told me there'd been a couple reports of a girl screaming near the river that summer, but nothing was ever found. To this day, I don't know if she was real or not, but I know I heard her, and I know she stood outside my tent smiling. My name's Ben. This happened last summer on a weekend trip with 5 of my mates. We drove out to a state forest, found a flat clearing and set up 2 tents. There was beer, burgers, a fire, the usual. We were all buzzing, tired, laughing, trying to forget work. About 11, when we were all a bit drunk and feeling brave, Darren suddenly got this stupid idea. He said, "Whoever goes 50 meters into those trees and comes back gets a hot meal tomorrow night." Most of us laughed, but Tom, always the one who wanted to prove stuff, said, "I'll do it." He swung his jacket over his shoulder and walked toward the dark line of trees like it was nothing. We watched him go for a while, the beam from his torch bobbing between trunks. Then the light stopped. We waited. 30 minutes passed and Tom still hadn't come back. The laughter died quiet. It went from fun to stupid fast. We decided to go find him. There were 6 of us, 2 with proper headlamps, the rest with phones that barely lit paths. The trees were close and the ground went down into a small hollow. We followed Tom's footprints at first, but they faded soon. The deeper we went, the heavier the air felt, like someone had put a weight on my chest. It wasn't just me. All of us kept saying the same thing out loud, half laughing in a scared way. "It feels heavy, like someone sat on my shoulders." We pressed on. The forest got dark and thick. Branches scratched at our faces. The only sounds were our boots on leaves and the soft buzz of the headlamps. After about half a kilometer, the trees opened a little into a small clearing. There, on the ground, Tom was lying face down. We rushed to him and shook him. He was breathing but nearly limp. His skin was cold. I could see mud on his shirt, scratches on his hands. We carried him back to the tents the best we could, 2 of us under his arms, another on his legs. No one wanted to talk. The walk back felt slower, like the forest didn't want us to leave. Back at camp, after about 20 minutes, Tom finally blinked, looked at each of our faces like he was surprised to see us. We asked him what happened. At first, he couldn't speak. Then he told us this. He'd walked in, deeper than the others, planning to come back and jump out and scare everyone. He said in the trees he saw a flare of light, like a small, bright torch, but blue-white. He moved toward it because he thought someone else might be lost. When he came close, he saw something nailed to a tree. It wasn't a person. It was made of clothes, sticks, and old bits of rope, like a scarecrow, only uglier. Tom said he felt watched. He said the air felt tight, like pressure pushing down on his chest. He tried to turn and run, but his legs went weak and he collapsed, and then nothing until we found him. We thought it was a prank at first. Who would do something like that? Who would make that thing and leave it up in the trees? We called the cops in the morning and drove back with him to the spot. He took pictures, looked at the tree, and frowned. He said someone had been there recently, but he didn't want to guess why. He said he'd mark it and check the area later, but we never heard more. If there's one thing I learned from that night, it's this. A dare is a small thing until it takes you into someone else's space. The woods can hold people who do strange things, and sometimes those things are left hanging on trees like signs you don't want to see. I grew up in Perth, Australia, and this happened during a camping trip on the Coral Coast. Me and two mates, Ryan and Luke, set up camp near the dunes overlooking the water. The first night was fine, but on the second, I woke up around 3 a.m. to footsteps. At first, I thought it was Ryan going to take a leak, but then I heard Ryan whisper from his tent. He was inside. The footsteps circled us, crunching slowly in the sand. Heavy steps, like boots. I whispered, "Luke, you out there?" But he muttered back from his own tent. All three of us were inside, wide awake, listening. The steps went on for what felt like an hour, sometimes stopping right outside, then moving again. We didn't dare look. When the sun finally rose, we crawled out. The sand around us was covered in prints, large boot marks leading in from the dunes. But here's the thing, they led in. None led back out. We walked out toward the beach, following them, but halfway across the sand, they just stopped. Like whoever it was disappeared into thin air. That night, we barely slept. Every gust of wind sounded like steps. Every shadow felt like someone was standing there, watching. My brother and I were camping in New Hampshire near a trailhead. Around 1 a.m., we both woke up to a sound that makes my skin crawl even now. A woman screaming. It started far away, echoing through the trees, then closer, then suddenly cut off. We grabbed our flashlights and ran to the tree line shouting, but there was nothing. The woods were dead silent. We went back to the fire and sat in silence, jumpy at every crack. At 3 a.m., the scream came again, but this time it wasn't distant. It was right behind our tents, high-pitched, raw, like someone was being torn apart. We didn't wait. We packed what we could, left the rest, and hiked to the car in pitch black. The cops we spoke to the next morning just shook his head. He said other campers had reported screams in those woods for years, but no one ever found a body. To this day, when I think about it, the thing that scares me most isn't the scream. It's the silence that followed, like whatever was out there wanted us to know it could get close. Summer nights in the woods might sound peaceful, but sometimes they hold things you can't explain or people you wish you'd never run into. If you've ever had something unexplainable happen while camping, share your story in the comments. Who knows, it might end up in one of our next videos. My name's Dylan. This happened 3 summers ago when I was 19. My best friend Eric wanted to rent a cabin up at Lake Arrowhead for a week. Just us. Some fishing rods, a cooler of beer, and the lake. Eric's uncle knew a guy who let us use the place for free if we cleaned up. The cabin wasn't falling apart, but it felt off. Old furniture, wood paneling, and the walls covered with Polaroids, hundreds of them, all of the lake from different angles and times. Eric joked the owner was a photographer, but it felt obsessive. The first night we sat on the deck drinking and heard splashing like something big hitting the water. I pointed a flashlight across the lake and saw a shape, not a fish, not an animal I could name. It looked like a person, too tall, limbs moving weird. Then it slipped under and disappeared. Later, inside, I noticed a few Polaroids had faint shapes in the water, like what I'd seen. The second night I woke to Eric shaking me. Footsteps on the deck. Slow, heavy, crossing and stopping. Then silence. A minute later, splashing. In the morning, our car wouldn't start. The battery was dead. That day we tried to act normal, fishing and joking, but we felt watched. Eric pointed to the shore and whispered, "Tell me you see that." Standing waist deep in the water was a man, staring at us. He didn't move. We ran inside and locked the doors. Minutes later, he was gone. At 2 a.m. the next night, I heard splashing very close, under the deck. I peeked through the blinds and nearly screamed. Something was crawling up the shore on all fours, moving wrong, joints bending the wrong way. We grabbed a baseball bat and hid in the bedroom until morning. We packed and walked 5 miles down the road until someone gave us a ride back to town. Days later, when we returned with a tow truck, every single Polaroid had been taken down, gone. Eric thinks it was a creep messing with us. I don't. I saw what I saw. I won't go back to Lake Arrowhead. This happened in the summer of 2019. My cousin Nate and I were driving from California to Texas for a road trip. It was late at night, close to midnight, and we were running low on gas in the middle of Arizona. The desert was endless. No lights, no houses, nothing but road. When the gas light came on, we both started to panic a little. The GPS showed one gas station about 20 miles away, so we crossed our fingers and hoped we would make it. We rolled into the station just as the car started to sputter. It looked old, almost abandoned. One pump, a faded sign that barely lit up, and a small store. No other cars, no noise. The pump didn't take cards, so I told Nate to stay with the car while I went inside to pay with cash. Inside, there was one man behind the counter. He was older, maybe in his 60s, wearing a trucker hat. He didn't greet me or smile. He just stared. When I handed him $20 for gas, he finally said in a dry voice, "Pump 1. The whole time, I felt like he was watching me too closely. Not in a friendly way, in a way that made me want to leave fast. When I stepped back outside, Nate was standing next to the car, looking nervous. He told me that while I was inside, he saw someone crouched down near the back of the car. He thought it was an animal at first, but when he called out, the figure darted behind the building. I checked with my phone flashlight. Nothing, just empty desert and shadows. We filled up quickly and got back in the car. As we pulled out onto the highway, I checked my mirror and froze. On the trunk of the car, in the dust, were handprints. Not one or two, a bunch of them, smeared across the back like someone had been pressing down on it. Nate saw them too. Neither of us spoke for a while. We drove faster. After a few miles, Nate swore he saw smudges on the side doors too, like someone had dragged their hand across while we were moving. I pulled over, heart racing. We both jumped out to look. The handprints were real, but again, there was no one there. We didn't wait around. We drove straight to the next motel we could find. It was past 3 in the morning when we finally parked and checked in. Before going inside, I walked around to check the car one last time. The handprints were gone, completely gone. The car looked clean, like nothing had ever been there. I didn't sleep much that night. Nate and I never brought it up again after that trip. But I'll never forget the feeling in my stomach when I first saw those handprints in the mirror. I don't know who or what was out there at that gas station, but I know for sure we weren't alone that night. My name's Rachel. This happened the summer after my freshman year. My parents rented a beach house in South Carolina for 2 weeks, and I brought my friend Mia and my then boyfriend Kevin. The house was perfect, right on the sand, big porch, everything you'd want. First few days were normal. Swimming, sun, cheap wine. But by the 4th night, I kept noticing the house next door. From outside, it looked empty. Shutters closed, paint peeling, no cars. Still, some nights I'd see a faint light upstairs, like a candle. Every time I saw it, I felt watched. On the 6th night, we were playing cards when someone knocked around midnight. Kevin opened the door. A man stood there, mid-40s, soaking wet, smiling too wide. He said his power was out and asked to use our phone. He looked strange dry one moment, dripping the next, but Kevin handed it over. The man stared at the phone, didn't dial, then handed it back and said, "Thanks. I'll see you around." Then he walked across the sand and into the ocean. He kept going until the waves swallowed him. We were frozen. Kevin laughed it off, but Mia and I couldn't sleep. In the morning, I found wet footprints on our porch, starting at the stairs and ending at our door. That night, I woke to whispering outside my bedroom window. A man's voice, clear as day. "Let me in." Mia and I screamed. Kevin turned on the light and the whispering stopped. We left 3 days early. A week later, the rental company called my parents. The house next door had been condemned for years. The last tenant, a man reported to have walked into the ocean and drowned. My name's Tyler. I grew up in New Hampshire, and every summer my family went camping in Maine. It was tradition. But the summer I turned 17, something happened that made me never want to camp again. We stayed at this old campground near a lake. It wasn't like those family-friendly ones. This was more isolated. Thick woods, dirt paths, maybe 10 other families total. The first night was fine s'mores, ghost stories, the usual. But around 2 a.m., I woke up to what sounded like crying. At first, I thought it was an animal, but it was definitely a person, a little kid, a girl, maybe 8 or 9. I unzipped the tent and saw her standing at the edge of the trees. Pale skin, long dark hair, wearing what looked like a white nightgown. She was barefoot. I whispered, "Are you okay?" But she didn't answer. She just turned and walked deeper into the woods. I was about to follow her when my dad yanked me back inside the tent. He'd woken up too and saw her. He said, "Don't you ever follow something like that in the woods." The next morning, we asked around the campground, but nobody was missing a kid. Everyone acted like they didn't know what we were talking about. That night, it happened again. The crying. The little girl at the tree line, but this time, she was closer. And when I looked at her face, it wasn't right. Her mouth was too wide, her eyes too dark. I didn't sleep a second. And at dawn, we found something outside our tent. Tiny, muddy handprints all over the fabric. We left that day. My parents claimed it was probably some prank, but I know what I saw. A few months later, I did some digging online. Turns out that campground had a history. 30 years ago, a little girl had gone missing there. They searched for weeks, but her body was never found. People say if you camp too close to the lake, you'll hear her crying at night. And if you follow her into the woods, you never come back. That's all for today's stories. If you've ever had something creepy happen to you, share it with us in the comments. Your story might even be featured in a future video. And if you enjoyed this one, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the bell so you don't miss the next upload. These are summer road and travel encounters that still haunt the people who went through them. Nothing paranormal, nothing theatrical, just real moments where instincts saved someone or left them with something they can't explain. These are told in first person as they happened. Back in 2009, I decided to move from New Orleans up to Portland. I was 24 and I packed what I could into a clunky 14-foot U-Haul and drove out. No smartphone, just a simple flip phone, no GPS, and a stack of printed MapQuest directions in the passenger seat. It was the kind of trip that felt like freedom, even if it was mostly truck stops and highway white lines. Somewhere in central Texas late that day, I realized I'd underestimated how far the next gas station would be. The fuel gauge was flirting with empty, and I hadn't seen an exit in what felt like forever. Then, like a mirage, a tiny little town appeared. I didn't catch the name because I was focused on getting to the pump before the truck died. It was one of those blink and you miss it places. Maybe 6 streets, a single gas pump. Hardly any signs. Quiet in a way that felt wrong. I filled up, Didn't go inside the shop and figured I'd be back on the highway in minutes. But when I tried to find the on-ramp, I kept circling, not once or twice. I circled that town 4 times. I could see the highway from certain points, but every road I took looped me back or ended in a dead end. I started to panic. Finally, I went into the little gas station to ask. The guy behind the counter was lanky with long, greasy hair falling over his face. He barely looked up from the magazine he was flipping, and when I asked for directions, he gave me this odd answer: take a road that will get me back to the highway. But only after driving 17 miles out of town. I told him that didn't make sense. We hadn't even driven that far to get here. And he just shrugged and mumbled something about the road curving around. I left the store with my stomach in knots. There wasn't any single thing he'd said that screamed danger, but the way he avoided eye contact, the shrug, it set off every bad instinct I'd ever had. I sat in my truck with my hands shaking so hard I could hardly get the key in the ignition. I remember crying right there for a moment. I wasn't afraid of a wrong turn. I was afraid of what I might find out there, alone with a truck full of stuff and zero signal. Then a beat-up red pickup rolled up to the pumps. The man who stepped out was everything you picture as a Texas trucker. Big flannel, work boots, this thick beard. He looked rough but solid, the kind of person who makes you feel like you can breathe again. I ran up to him and asked if he knew the way back to the highway. Maybe it was the desperation on my face or the fact I was near tears, but he didn't hesitate. He smiled and said he could help. He told me the real route, a tricky little turnoff just past a short concrete tunnel, a spot you could miss if you blinked, with no proper signs. He laughed at the idea that the gas station guy had told me to go 16 or 17 miles the other way, and when I repeated that route, his whole face changed. He asked how I even knew about it. When I said the clerk gave it to me, he went quiet, and then he asked if I had a proper map. I only had MapQuest printouts, not helpful here. He pulled a battered paper map from his truck, spread it on the hood, and traced the clerk's route. It didn't curve back toward the interstate. It veered away deeper into desert and scattered trailers. He told me that road ran about 17 miles into nowhere and ended. Nothing there but rusted cars, a few trailers, and some sketchy people folks around here tried to avoid. He told me the man at the gas station lived out on that patch of road. The way Texas, that's what I call him in my head, looked at me when he said I'd been right to trust my gut stuck with me. He said if I went that way and something bad happened, nobody would find me for a long time. I don't know what the guy at the counter wanted. I don't know what would have happened if I'd driven the other road. All I know is I walked away with the help of a stranger and a paper map, and I never forgot the way that town felt like it was closing in. I never saw the gas station clerk again. I never got his name. But I learned something that day. When something doesn't feel right on the road, believe it. A couple years later, I was on a road trip with a friend's family that ended at a small concert across the border. It was an easy plan. Drive during the day, pull into campsites at night, crash in their camper van. Nothing fancy, good company and music. On the first night, before we even crossed the state line, we parked at a family-style campground right next to a beach. RVs lined up tidy, kids running in the daylight, the whole calm family vacation vibe. After dinner, I walked down toward the water alone to clear my head. The shore was quiet under the moon, and there was this old wooden shack near the dunes. You see those little storage buildings near the water all the time. I noted it as a landmark and kicked off my shoes. I stood with my feet in the surf, watching the waves. Off in the distance there was a man standing, but since this was a public beach, I didn't think much of him. When I decided to head back, the man was gone. That's when I saw movement behind the shack, someone trying to duck out of sight. My skin pulled tight. I called a friend who I knew would be awake and started talking loud on the phone, dropping hints like, "Yeah, I see you. I'll meet you in 5." I kept the shack in my peripheral vision and made a big, wide path around it as I walked back to the camper. I locked the door and slept with the curtains drawn. A year later, as we talked about that trip, my friend went quiet when I mentioned the shack. He told me something I hadn't known. His younger brother had woken in the middle of the night a few months after our trip and watched a man outside our camper window through the glass. The guy was just standing there, staring in. He ran off when he realized he'd been seen, but he hadn't come from the beach. He'd been hiding near that shack and followed whoever had been there back to the campers. At the time, I thought it was a one-off, a creep, a drunk tourist. But hearing his brother's story turned that uneasy memory into something worse. Whoever was hiding by the shack might have followed me back. I still don't know what he wanted. I don't want to know. But I remember the feeling of walking toward the camper and forcing myself to act casual, and I think about how close that night came to being something really bad. A few summers later, my partner and I were on our way back home after a weekend camping trip in the backcountry of British Columbia. We know those forest roads well, which is why it surprised us when a man stepped out from the tree line and waved us down as if he'd been standing there forever. He looked wrong for the place. Thick flannel in the middle of a warm day, dusty tan pants, work boots, and big glasses. Pale, gaunt face, and he moved too slowly, his speech measured like he was repeating lines. He asked for a jump, said his battery had died, and his vehicle was up the side trail. We always try to help people when we can, especially out there where help is rare. So my partner followed him down a narrow, overgrown path, me riding quiet in the truck, heart beating. After a short way, we came into a small clearing, and there it was, a dusty beige sedan with the trunk open and a blanket tossed over it. The hood was up already. No fishing poles, no coolers, no signs of anyone actually camping or fishing, just the car and the man. My partner hooked up the jumper cables. The man kept talking but didn't help. He stood there watching, not in a grateful way, but in a way that made my skin crawl. When the engine finally roared to life, he hopped back out and thanked us with this too intense smile. My partner didn't bother to properly put the cables away. He climbed back in and I backed out fast, branches scraping the sides as we tore back up the trail. When we were on the main road again, we both breathed like we'd run a marathon. He told me the guy had stood in that clearing watching us back out. Maybe he was a weird guy with a broken down car and poor social skills. Maybe he was someone setting a trap. Either way, something about the whole setup felt wrong. We still talk about that one, how easily it could have gone sideways if we'd slowed down our guard for half a second. Those are real stories told by people who were just doing what millions of us do, driving, camping, trying to get from one place to another. No silly hauntings, no flashy monsters, just nights where people were followed, watched, or led into places that felt wrong. If there's one lesson that ties them all together, it's that your gut matters. When the road gives you a bad feeling, don't ignore it. If you've been through something like this, a late night drive that turned strange, a campground moment that didn't add up, a place where you felt watched, tell us in the comments. We read every single one. And if you want these real stories to keep coming, hit subscribe and share this video with someone who loves true tense road stories.